An outrageous allegation from a BBC anchor has put a spotlight on media bias against Israel.
More than 50 Israelis have been killed or injured by terrorists from Jenin in the past year. Still, Israel's being blamed for the violence in the media. Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
During an interview with former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, a BBC anchor made the following statement.
Terrorists, but children. The Israeli forces are happy to kill children.
The anchor noted 4 of the 11 terrorists killed were under the age of 18. Bennett responded with this question.
You know, it's quite remarkable that you'd say that because they're killing us. Now, if there's a 17-year-old Palestinian that's shooting at your family, Anjana, what is he?
After the interview, the BBC apologized for the anchor's statement. While this was a legitimate subject to examine in the interview, we apologize that the language used in this line of questioning was not phrased well and was inappropriate.
I found their apology to be rather pathetic. That was just such a preposterous allegation, especially during an operation in which there were how many civilian deaths, Chris? 0.
Gil Huffman is executive director of Honest Reporting, a group that monitors the media's reporting on Israel. He says when the media gets it wrong about Israel, it can become a matter of life and death. He points to coverage during this year's Ramadan, when Muslim rioters barricaded themselves in the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount. When Israeli police went inside to stop the rioters from harming worshippers, the story got flipped upside down.
They took YouTube videos that made it look like it was the IDF attacking these rioters, and of course the headlines around the world were Israeli police attack worshippers in mosque. And that was the exact opposite of the truth. But that false reporting was used as an excuse to fire rockets at Israelis from Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza.
Hoffman says another example is when CNN anchor Christiane Amanpour claimed Rabbi Leo D's wife and 2 daughters were killed in a shootout rather than murdered in a terror attack. Weeks later, Amanpour apologized. CBN News asked Rabbi D about her statement.
Tremendously upset, and the kids to be accused of a family being terrorists. Then we had 2 other interactions, as you say, with CNN, both of which made me feel like I was the terrorist and the terrorist somehow was the victim. And I think this is endemic in the CNN reporting, and so we are planning to take them to court, and the planning for that is currently underway.
Hoffman believes it's important to hold the media to account for bias against Israel, and he says that can save lives and help bring true peace to the region. Gordon?
Well, Chris, the IDF hasn't taken action on this scale in the West Bank for decades, so why was the raid necessary?
Well, yeah, that's right. It was 20 years ago, at least, that they went into Jenin. As we reported, more than 50 Israelis were killed or injured from terrorists operating out of Jenin. So the bulk of terrorist infrastructure in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, was in Jenin. And the terror attacks are really, Gordon, just part of the picture. There's Molotov cocktails, pipe bombs, shootings, and they have been happening there on a daily basis. In May alone, there were about 200 of these kinds of different attacks. So that's what these people, 800,000 Jews in Judea and Samaria face almost every day. And what's behind it many times is Iran. They fund these terrorists. They provide the financing for it. They smuggle weapons. They provide training. It's all part of Iran's strategy to weaken and eventually destroy the Jewish state, which is another reason why Israel felt like it needed to take a major action. And despite this, Gordon, many in the media, like the BBC has, they portray the situation completely different.
Well, I grew up perhaps in a kinder, gentler age, although I'm not sure the 1960s were all that kind or gentle. But at the same time, when reports came out of Israel of terrorist attacks, it was quite clear who was being the enemy, if you will, who was being the wrong, and who was the victim. And whether it was an airplane hijacking or the horror that happened at the Olympics, or all the various attacks that were occurring in Jerusalem, the West Bank, in all of that, it was clear who was the actor, who was the victim. So now the media is accusing the IDF of abuses. What do military experts say about their actions during a raid?
Well, last week we talked to the IDF former international spokesman. He just explained what the IDF was doing. But there's an independent expert that we know. We've interviewed him before. He's the former commander of British forces in Afghanistan. His name is Colonel Richard Hemp. And he said the fact that there were literally no civilian fatalities in those 2 days of urban fighting was remarkable achievement. He says it was probably unprecedented in modern warfare. He says the casualty ratio for these kind of fightings is almost like 3 to 5 civilians killed for each and every fighter. And while Western armies do their best to avoid civilian casualties, now this is what he said. He doubts that any other army in the world would be able to achieve what the IDF did in Jenin. And more remarkable because what the terrorists do in Jenin and any kind of fighting like this, they hide behind the civilian population, use them as human shields, and they do it deliberately. By killing civilians, they attract world condemnation to Israel. We've seen that happen in Gaza, seen that happen in the West Bank. But the IDF does what it can to avoid civilian casualties and take people out of harm's way.
Is this, I guess, a form of newspeak that the media thinks if they repeat this again and again and again, then somehow people will start to believe it?
Well, it could be. It seems to be the method of operation of outlets like the BBC, not entirely, but these are sort of the egregious examples we're pointing out by this BBC report, as well as the CNN report that we talked about. It just seems to continue. Now, when we talked to Gil Huffman, he said that this is unfortunately something that continues to go on. Why they feel Honest Reporting and other groups like maybe Camera, they feel like they need to monitor the media's bias toward Israel on a regular basis to really call them out when they get things wrong.
Well, let's turn to politics because it's not just media engaging in the newspeak. President Joe Biden just called Benjamin Netanyahu's government one of the most, quote, extreme, close quote, he's seen. What's the reaction in Israel to that statement?
Well, publicly, it's kind of mild, but privately, it's more furious. Danny Jenin, he's the former Israeli ambassador to the UN. He tweeted that the U.S. needs to respect the policy of the state of Israel that's determined by the democratically elected people of Israel. Now, privately, we've been heard that the reaction by many members of the coalition was actually furious about the comments. But right now, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu really doesn't want any breaches in the relationship with the U.S. That's why some of the public reaction has been kind of muted. They want the U.S. Involvement in any military action against Iran's nuclear facility. So I think you have to see all the reaction in that light. They want to make sure they keep Iran the priority here in Israel.
Well, I understand that, but is the current administration, is Joe Biden just repeating what Obama did? Obama actually funded opposition campaigns against Netanyahu when he was in office, something that absolutely astounded me, that our State Department, that our campaign experts would somehow get involved in order to change democracy in Israel. It made no sense to me. Is this just a repeat of that?
Well, many people say that Biden's administration in relation to Israel is like Obama 2.0. There has been a report recently in the Washington Examiner that the current U.S. ambassador to Israel, Tom Nides, approved nearly $1 million in funding some of these NGOs that are actually behind some of the protests right now against the current government. So it seems like the Biden administration really is doing what they can to really foment some of the opposition against the current coalition. At least that's what the Washington Examiner had reported. But many believe, because of a number of actions, that what they're seeing in the Biden administration, whether it's relation to the Palestinian Authority or other issues in Iran especially, is really the second administration of the Obama administration.
Well, Chris, thanks for the insight. Thanks for the reporting. And for you at home, we stand with Israel. That was a pledge my father made in the 1970s. We will stand with them, and we will bring you accurate reporting of what's happening. So what you're hearing in the media, that somehow Israel is the aggressor, is not the reality and has never been the history. The Palestinians for decades have refused every single opportunity to create their own state. Why? Because their ideology demands that Israel, the Jews, be driven into the sea. That's their goal. That's what they've been trying to do for over 70 years. Let us recognize that. And let's also recognize what our own State Department, what our current administration is trying to do. And if they're trying to interfere with elections in order to achieve some kind of foreign policy, it is frankly un-American to do that. We shouldn't be interfering with other countries' elections.